students grow and learn best in an environment where genuine and compassionate, transformational relationships are abundant. We want Louisville Collegiate to be the healthiest place in the world to grow up, and have a sense of purpose is the key reason why we have such a strong community. With this shared conviction in mind, we are fortunate to have the opportunity to hear from our speaker this evening, Ambassador Matthew Barzun. The list of experiences and accomplishments is long and impressive. So much so, I will only hit on the big highlights here. Following his graduation from Harvard College in the 90s, Matthew helped build a startup media company, CNET, to share ideas and respond to the rapidly shifting landscape of technology, business, entertainment in the dot-com era. Following his time at CNET, Matthew began working with Barack Obama. He helped develop a transformational model for engaging a wide swath of contributors, particularly young people, to Obama's 2008 Audacity to Win campaign. That campaign ended up shattering expectations for volunteer participation and fundraising, really changing the paradigm for political campaigns for the future. 4 years later, Matthew went on to serve as President Obama's finance chair for the 2012 presidential re-election campaign. He has served as a U.S. ambassador to Sweden and the United Kingdom. He is a noted speaker and an acclaimed author, and he and Brooke are also the parents of collegiate alumni Eleanor and Charles Barzun. Welcome home. Throughout Mr. Barzun's work, there is a steadfast dedication to building communities and teams where creativity flourish and where commitment to the larger work of the whole runs deep. In his recent book, The Power of Giving Power Away, synthesizes beautifully the wisdom he has gained from his diverse accomplishments. I read his book this past summer, and I've been struck by how many great conversations it has spurred among friends, family, and other school leaders about what good leadership is and what it accomplishes. I expect this talk will have the same effect on us here tonight, and we will be better for it. Collegiate is proud to call Matthew and Brooke our friends. We are thrilled to have them here tonight. Please welcome Matthew Barzun.
Thank you, Dr. McCrae. Everyone hear me okay?
Wait, I'm going to turn this off, but
Yeah, I think I'm hooked up to something. Yeah?
Yeah, let's turn it on.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
Learn helplessness. Okay, better.
No.
No? Better now.
Yes.
Okay, this is awesome. There's so many familiar yet masked faces. So this is the second time only on my book tour that I've been able to be in an actual room with real people. So this is a thrill. So I am eager to make this as much of a conversation as we possibly can. Thanks to Dr. McCrae and Mr. Gahan. I had a chance to meet with the senior leadership team here at Collegiate, but it was virtually this summer. And that was a great session. I learned a lot from. And then my dear friend from college, Paul McLaughlin. I don't have my glasses on. Paul, where are you? There you are, Paul. So I went to Paul like our kids were tiny. And I'm doing drop-off, and Paul is one of those amazing parents, and I was never one of these, who volunteered to take other people's children out of the car. I was just so proud of myself that I had taken my own children to preschool at Hayfield Montessori. And there's Paul, and he has not changed at all since college. He looks exactly the same. I was like, oh my gosh, how did a guy from Glasgow and a guy from Boston end up in Louisville, Kentucky? And then our elder daughters ended up being great friends. So Lucy, I'm gonna call on you, his younger daughter, somehow was volunteered or voluntold to participate.
Yes, in between those.
And I would love, can I put you on the spot, Lucy, to just ask a question and then we just all can talk, because I don't think, life is short and I don't want to go give a speech at a bunch of real wonderful human beings. I'd love to have a discussion.
So I'm Lucy McLaughlin. I'm a senior. much as I'm thinking about how does it affect me, a high school student. So Calder and I were both wondering, within a school setting, there's a fairly rigid power structure, and it's more of a pyramid structure with teachers and older students. And so as we are going into our freshman year of college next year, we are wondering how we create a constellation structure as someone at the bottom of this pyramid.
Ooh, that's a good one. So how you would, as a, well, here you are, I mean, you're at the, so the book, for those of you who haven't read it, has basically an oversimplified, but I hope helpful dichotomy. One way is called the pyramid perspective. We're all pretty familiar at it. We're all pretty good at it. I think it's the world. The obvious form is top down, ranking, grading, sorting, sifting, winning, losing, in, out, that kind of thing. It's also the world of bottom up, which sounds different, but it's the exact same shape. And if you say bottom up, so let's say Dr. McCrae instituted a bottom up thing. You, whether you're faculty, staff, or student, have one of two choices. You either are looking at people around you as beneath you, or you're looking around and beneath someone else. And that just strikes me as odd. Sometimes there's a time and place for a pyramid perspective, but we've, I think, let it become this default setting in our lives. And so that's one world. And then I contrast it with this image that I discovered in the process of writing this book called The Constellation, which is on your passport if you're American and you have a passport. It's on the back of the US dollar bill. It is that weird symbol that you may have seen, you guys are young, but you'll see it a lot. Right underneath it is that Latin phrase, in pluribus unum, out of many one. That's how the folks who came up with that logo and that motto wanted us to think about that mysterious statement. How can you be one? How can you be truly yourself and part of something bigger than yourself? It could be, and they could have put it on the back of the logo where the pyramid exists, from many bricks, one pyramid. That's one way of looking at the world. I think it's kind of a depressing way, because in that world you either fit in or you were left out. But they didn't put it there. They put it right under this weird asymmetrical 13 stars called the constellation. And that way you can stand out as yourself, you Lucy, and be part of something bigger, the constellation, by connecting to Calder and all these other wonderful friends. So that didn't answer your question. But I think, I mean, you guys are seniors, right? Okay, do you feel
Student
like...
body president, too.
Oh, well done. Do you feel like you're at the top? Does it feel that way?
In some aspects, yes. I think, like, just confidence-wise walking around the school, I feel like I'm, like, you know, a big person on campus, and I know most people now. But I don't feel like above my teachers or above my work or anything like that. I still feel like I am below things as well.
Yeah, and I think so it's a hard question. High school seniors are good at that. I do. I think it's funny, you know, it's like they shouldn't feel, I mean, families, and I happen to know and love your family, like families are interesting tests of like, no healthy, all families are weird and imperfect, but like the family dinner table, healthy ones aren't at all like a pyramid. Like you have this weird relationship and we're all like, you're a sister, you're a daughter, you're a friend, you can wear all these different roles. And so what I find empowering about the Constellation perspective is you get to be you and you get to present different facets of yourself at the dinner table, at the table here in the dining hall, and they all count. And you can fit into lots of different constellations. And you can be cool seniors in the senior lounge or whatever. And if you're doing that all the time, that would be kind of concerning, I think, right? Because you're about to go be a first year somewhere. And, you know, you can probably remember what it was like to be a freshman here. Did I answer your question at all? No. You're being very nice.
Matthew, I'm willing to meet with them to talk about how we can be more of a Constellation school, working with the students and working with the president and the vice president of the student senate. So I'd be happy to take this as a challenge to be more, and I think we already are more than some, but I would love to figure out ways for the student to feel more empowered. And so let's the three of us take that challenge on together. Is that all right?
Yeah, and I think parents, I'm a parent of children, used to be a parent of children, still feel like one. And I think we perpetuate, without even meaning to, this kind of pyramid perspective. When we get a new head of school, we don't use the term principal, but in public high schools, we use that term. And we play into it when we're like, ooh, they're the principal, they're the boss, they're kind of CEO of the school. And we forget that principal is short for principal teacher. And I don't think we make this mistake. We don't think about law firms a lot. Do we have any lawyers in the group? I'm raising my hand, I'm not one. Okay. But like if there's a new managing partner at a law firm, we're actually better about that. We don't think that the new lawyer is like the boss of all the other lawyers. They're just the one doing administrative managing partner duties for a while. But they're sort of equal professionals doing that. And that is true in a school. Each of these teachers is an amazing principal doing what they're, their own teacher, and they ought to feel like they're part of a constellation and not part of some rigid corporate style hierarchy. Caller, can I put you on the spot?
Yeah, I'm Calder Beasley. I'm also a senior. Beasley. So Lucy and I, we're discussing a lot of the benefits of the Constellation method, and we really enjoyed that. We had some good discourse. And then taking on a little bit more of not like a pessimistic view, but a critical view. We were wondering how, innate within a hierarchy, there's a relationship between power and responsibility. And so the more power you have, the more responsibility you take. So within a constellation model, where the power is more evenly distributed amongst all the stars, we were wondering how does that affect who takes the responsibility when something goes astray?
Yeah, it's a great word. I'm going to stand just so I can see everybody. And I love that you use the word responsibility, because it's a big and full and important word. There's this wonderful guy who I never got to meet, but he ran the public school system in Finland. He was the head person. And they would never phrase it that way because there are no private schools. So all schools are public. And every year, Finland wins best K through 8 education in the world. Every 5th year, Singapore wins, which is annoying if you're Finnish. And then they win the next year, right? And the United States, we pride ourselves on being on the top of lists. And I think we're 22nd or something globally. And I used to live in the UK, as you know, and they pride themselves on being really good at stuff too, and they're 20th. So it's annoying, they're a little bit better than we are, but still not that great. And so a bunch of New Yorkers who care about education bring this guy every year to New York to be tell me your secret. And the first thing they do is well, tell me about magnet schools. And he's we don't have any. And that's very disappointing to the group that paid a lot of money for this guy over here. But he said the next question, whenever he's brought to New York, they say, well, tell me about teacher accountability. And he says, and Finnish people, like Swedish people, speak better English than we do. And he said, we don't have a word for accountability in Finnish. But I have enough American friends, so I've learned, I think I understand what you mean by accountability. It's that thin, mean thing you have left after you've removed responsibility. It's that thin, mean thing you have after you've removed responsibility. And I love that. And so accountability is a thing, right? It's a thing. It's a word I think we use, and you did not use wonderfully. We use it all the time. It is often in a corporate or government setting code for something else. How can I fire you? How can I haul you up and humiliate you in front of my committee? Right? It's an angry, mean word. And there's a place for it in our democracy, I get it. But Pope Francis once said, I was not there, maybe my mother-in-law Christy was there. Someone told me this great story. He made a different point, and he said it's the difference between a glass of red wine and a glass of, I shouldn't be talking about distilled spirits with you young people, but and a little glass of grappa. And Pope Francis said, this red wine is good for many things, and this thing of grappa is good for one thing only. And that kind of reminds me a little bit about responsibility, which is a full concept in this narrow view of just accountability. So I think responsibility is a really important part of this whole constellation mindset. And I think the biggest misunderstanding as I've been on this virtual book tour is that the pyramid perspective, which is very good for some things, offers stability and order. So much so that if someone like me is encouraging you to step out of that stability and order, smart people who've done well by the pyramid are like, they fold their arms and they're like, I don't think so. Life outside the pyramid is either anarchy or communism. And that is true. Those two things do lie outside the pyramid. It's not what the constellation is. But there's such skepticism that everything else must be, if you stick with the analogy, kind of like just a million random stars in the night sky, of anarchy, everyone for themselves, or we're all part of some giant fireball sun of collectivism. But the constellation is quite different. It's like, no, you be you, I'll be me. And how can we make connections between us? And responsibility is absolutely at the heart of the whole thing. Responsibility for yourself and the connections you choose to make to something more powerful than you could by yourself. Yes, sir.
So after I read your book, at times I thought you were being a bit Pollyannish, which is your one. Kind of a two-part question. With
Good to be with you.
With American education and socialization as it is,
No.
in the real world now, we talk about power sharing and responsibility and all of it. But could you argue that the majority of Americans are actually more comfortable with not taking responsibility and following a set cadre of leaders, even though they may be
Yeah.
And if that is the case, I don't know, how would you remedy that type of kind of sheeple mindset that a lot of people may have?
Good to be with you again. I mean,
Great read, by the way.
oh, well, hey, thanks. It's interesting. I think, because it's interesting. You use the phrase power sharing. It is trendy right now. And I think, and the leaders that have inspired me that I try to highlight in the book, I think there's the obvious forms of lording power over other people. I hope we all got the memo. That is so incredibly disempowering and not effective. So the next instinct, if you're not going to lord it over someone else, it's like, how about I lord it all to myself? And that feels a little bit better, but not for long, because we end up alienated and lonely. So the third mistake, I think, but understandable, is if you're not going to lord it and you're not going to hoard it, I know, how about we chop it up and share it? Which is better than those first two, but I think ultimately unsatisfying also. And what these leaders I got inspired by, as different as they did, and they went on to form Alcoholics Anonymous and the internet and the largest commercial organization in the history of the world, which is Visa, and Wikipedia, which I hope all of us use. These amazing innovations and organizations and many more. And they had this common insight about power, which is it isn't, and this is the problem I think with power sharing, is that power sharing most of the time implies that there's only so much of it to go around. So if I have 10 units, if I give someone else 3, I have 7. But these leaders are like, no, power isn't a scarce resource like something you mine in Eastern Kentucky. It is something you make, and it is infinite. You can make it with other people sitting around tables like this. If you bring the right mindset to it. But so often we bring the wrong mindset to that table. And to me, I mean, this woman that if I had known about her long, I want to read a whole book about her, but she's kind of the matron saint, I think, of this constellation mindset, who you know from reading the book. This woman, Mary Parker Follett, who was writing 100 years ago. And think about it. She's writing, America is coming out of a global pandemic. Racial, economic, social division everywhere she looks. Raging debates about the scary power of big business. Equally raging debates about all the fear of government overreach to do something about big business. Sounds kind of familiar. And so Mary Parker Follett said 100 years ago, look, all of that can be daunting. I get it, but we can all do something about it at our next Monday morning meeting. She loved meetings, and she thought democracy lived at round tables all across America. And like, how do we choose to come to that meeting? And she said, every single meeting, think about one you've had. There are 4 possible outcomes of a meeting, and only one of them is worthwhile. Bad outcome number 1, you try to win. Why did you invite anyone else to that meeting? Bad outcome number 2, and Vicky, this is where I think gets to the sheep point you were making, which is just acquiesce. It's like, I don't know, John or Jane, they seem super pushy. Let them have their way. It's like, no. Why are you at that meeting? You are denying that group your unique perspective if you don't say something. And then, that outcome number 3, and this is tricky because we're all taught, I certainly was when I was younger, we're all taught to seek this out, and she thinks it's a big mistake, which is compromise. And she's like, the problem with compromise is it's just little partial victories and partial acquiescences. At best, you leave that meeting with a subset of what you came in with, but nothing more. Never anything more. So the only reason you should ever sit around a table with other people is to make something together, to co-create something. And if you co-create something, and it doesn't have to be like some beautiful thing. It could just be make a determination or make a product roadmap, or it doesn't really matter. As long as the word make is in it and you've done it together, this magic happens, this sort of mundane magic, which is you are forever part of that thing you made. It is forever part of you. And you're not diminished. You haven't lost yourself in it in some collectivist. No, you are still really you. In fact, you are more you for having participated with those other people and made it. And to me, what flows in long-winded answer to your wonderful question, what my interpretation of what Mary Follett, for where we all are today, is we need to bring 3 expectations into every single encounter. 1, expect to be needed. 2, expect to need others. And 3, and most important of all, expect to be changed. And to me, that's the reciprocal obligation with number 1. That if you bring your whole self, your truth, to the table, which you have to, as painful as it might be, and and nerve-wracking as that might be, you have a reciprocal obligation to leave that meeting just a little bit different than you entered into it. If you have made something with those other men and women, boys and girls at that table, then the next time you show up with your full self, it's a little bit enhanced. So we don't, and I know this is a challenge for all of us, you don't show up to that meeting the same stale self as you were last month or last year. So that's how, I hope in a non-Pollyanna-ish way, we can deal with it. But Vicky, to your point, it's like it all hinges on not shuffling the difference. And you've been so good about this in your writing and reading, like dealing with the difference and embracing it and not trying to be Louisville polite and put it under the carpet. Because all the energy and power lies in difference. And trying to integrate that difference and co-create with it and not ignore it or just politely sort of smile through it. other questions, suggestions, thoughts, feelings?
Yes, we have one.
Okay, back to Lucy.
Okay. So as you described the constellation on the back of the dollar bill, and like you also described like the process of it being there and like how it wasn't always just accepted in those meetings. So like, and then also with the author you just mentioned, like the idea of the constellation method and shared power being present, like even back then. So we were wondering if your motivations to write the book was because you feel like this has been lost over time and you're just trying to bring attention back to it, or if you think that it's still present in society and you're just commending that.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I wanted to call the book. Thankfully, I was not allowed to. The publisher, turns out, they don't really let authors do a lot. And so I wanted to call it the Lost, I have a bunch of bad titles. Lost American Playbook, Lost Habits of Interdependence, and they're like, no one will ever pick up that book. Kelly here and the great team from Carmichael's, and they would probably agree. And so I learned that the job of a title isn't to explain every last thing in your book. It's just to get someone to be like, huh, and flip it over. And then if the back of the book does its job, then they open up the inside thing. So it begins the journey. It doesn't try to explain the whole thing. But I do think it has been lost. And my editor, who's is much younger than I am, Korean American woman who was amazing. And we dealt with a lot of difference in this process. And she was really against putting that whole first chapter about the founding. And she's like, how can you in this day and age want to talk about the founding of America with everything that's going on? Like, really, and I felt strongly that I really wanted to do it despite all of it. Because I think it's the best idea America has ever had. And it was tragic, meaning the idea of this constellation, the idea that you could be many and one, which is just a fancy way for saying not independence. And we glorify independence. And every July 4th, boom, boom, boom. September 17th, how did you and your family celebrate Citizenship and Constitution Day? None of us celebrate Citizenship and Constitution Day, right? It is a really important day. Any band of revolutionaries can declare independence, and they do it all the time. That was not the interesting part, July 4th, 1776. It was how the heck can we figure out how to work together? Now, obviously, with that historical context, tragically and hypocritically fell short of it then, still fall short of it. But I think it is the thing we ought to shoot for. Because this idea of how we can be one and many at the same time, which are the kind of lost habits, I think, of interdependence. And maybe to try to put it in sort of more modern terms. Quick show, everyone, I hope we'll get this answer right. It's supposed to be, it's not a trick question. If you had to guess two cars in the parking lot, you have to guess the Democrat car and the Republican car. I'm not going to make it easy, so it's not a red Ford F-150 and a blue Prius. Yeah. It is two identical, white Honda Civics or Ford Edges or something. But they each only have one bumper sticker and it only has one word. Car number 1 says freedom. Car number 2 says together. Car number 1 would be Republican. Car number 2 would be together. Okay, you guys are young, but in our adult lifetime, we have seen those two words taken to their extremes. So the freedom crowd, that's a really important, powerful word. It has been taken to mean freedom from, leave me the heck alone. Okay, overlay the COVID, what we've all been through together. That is like, leave me alone. The together crowd has taken it to its logical extreme, I think, of total togetherness, where some, when you hear this COVID debate, they talk about herd immunity, and it almost sounds like we're a herd of cattle in kind of a creepy, collectivist way, in my opinion. And what I think those two really important words and what the constellation represents at its theoretical best is something we desperately want and need, which is freedom together. Not freedom from one another, freedom through and with one another. And that was, again, the best American idea we ever had. We were given a motto for it from Benny One, and we were given a symbol for it in Constellation, and we ought to keep shooting for that. Do we have another one? Are we done with this? Can we just Great question. Yes, sir.
So Matthew, what would be your sort of perfect example of how the constellation method works? What have you witnessed, or what would you presume to be?
I mean, I remember, I think it was our son Charles at some point. He had some assignment for collegiate, and I said, he asked me how to help, and I didn't know the answer even close. I was like, I don't know, just go onto Wikipedia and start. He's like, we're not allowed to, Dad. And of course, what they weren't allowed to do was to use Wikipedia as a primary reference for good reason. I was like, everyone should begin their journey at Wikipedia because it's amazing. And so I would say Wikipedia. Harvard Business School wrote a case study a couple decades ago. Who went digital and beat Encyclopedia Britannica, which was one of the oldest companies and most successful companies in the world. And so everyone guesses Wikipedia, but that is not who Harvard Business School picked as the winner. They picked Microsoft Incarnate, which you were blissfully too young to remember. So Microsoft at the time was the richest company in the world. They had the most clever software engineers and marketers and all these amazing people. And they're like, we're going to beat Britannica, this great Scottish invention and they did, and they won for like 6 months, right? But then along comes Jimmy Wales, a commodities trader from Alabama, who, of course, famously invented Wikipedia. But what I think is interesting in the story I tell in the book is that he didn't start out with Wikipedia. He started out with Newpedia. And Newpedia was almost exactly the same with one crucial difference. He started out and he said, look, his business model was always the same. We're going to pay nobody anything to write for it. By the way, Microsoft and Encarta pay people to write articles. And we're not going to charge anyone anything to use it. And Encarta and Encyclopedia both charge people a lot of money in one case and a little bit of money in the other case to use it. You can imagine the baffled people like, what a stupid idea. But, he said, we're a bunch of sort of weirdo volunteers. No one's going to take us seriously. So we have to be paranoid. And we're going to have a 10-step review process to make sure that no plagiarized materials ever show up on our website. So they did, double peer reviewed like academia. And they do this, and after a year of hard work and putting the word out to their volunteer network, they had 18 articles. 18. And I think Britannica had 500,000. So they're just like, this is just never, even if we triple their, added a zero, 180 articles, like we're never going to get there. So this person on their team went to Jimmy and said, I had an idea. What if we get rid of the 10-step process? Don't be paranoid. And what if we give away power to all these people, but don't make people write full articles? Why don't you just let someone write a sentence and someone else write a paragraph and someone else who may not even have subject matter expertise, but they're kind of good at editing and making things conform to an encyclopedia-like tone? What if we just let them all do it? And there's a new piece of software called Wiki, for the Hawaiian word for quick. So Jimmy says, we'll try. So they do that. After their first year, 18,000 articles. And now it's something like 5.4 million articles in English alone, 240 languages. This thing is the largest human knowledge transfer engine in the history of the world. And it all began by this leap, which Microsoft, for all of its cleverness, they could see the power of hyperlinking, the power of digital compression, the power of video, all this power. They just couldn't see the power in you, Dale. They just couldn't imagine that any of us were capable of producing encyclopedia articles. So that would be A1. Visa is another one. Or Alcoholics Anonymous, I think, is another great one, which I'm sure everyone has either directly or indirectly been impacted by the world's most successful recovery platform. And have you heard about the 12 steps? So everyone's sort of heard about the 12 steps, but much less well reported are the 12 principles. And the 12 principles were, when you talk to the people at the founding, were how a group should behave. Back to Mary Parker Bach. How should a group behave as a group? And then how should groups behave with other groups? And that hasn't gotten into our public consciousness, but those set of rules and the rigor around how a group behaves around a table or around a circle is hugely important to their success. So those, I think, what they all have in common is, yes, they gave away power, but this isn't a group hug. It isn't some bad, no offense, middle school science project where one person does all the work and everyone else free rides. This is radically open and radically rigorous at the same time. And that rigor piece is so important. And it's amazing. If you think about Wikipedia, for all its faults, and by the way, Britannica has tons of mistakes in it too. They just weren't going to republish a whole bookshelf worth of books because of a mistake. Yeah. Yes.
You tell us in the book, and you're telling us about wonderful examples of constellation thinking and being. What about as you're on your journey with your book, are you not getting some great contemporary examples that warm your heart as you're talking to people like this one?
Yeah, I think the number one, two of the readers either on the website or on Zoom events in the chat I will get, or live on Zoom. I think schools are probably tied for first place of saying either universities or public high schools or something, like this sense of like, I think we should be more of a constellation than we really are. How might we, from a teacher perspective, which usually where they're from, and then big companies where someone says, look, I love my core team. My boss's boss has done really well by the pyramid. I can't imagine them giving up power anytime soon. How could I possibly try to make progress within a huge pyramid and start to behave in a constellation way? And so those are fun stories to hear. And by the way, just in answer to that second question, which is maybe less relevant to a school, but certainly for a company, which is, don't try to get your boss to give up power. That's a big ask right away. But the thing you can do, and it's helpful if you have a friend to do it with in your next Monday morning meeting, is just to say, I don't know, and really mean it. Maybe we might, ... And if your boss can watch 2 or 3 or 4 people sit around a table and make something together, it is so much more enriching, because your boss, who pretends they have all the answers, the first 3 words of the book are pretending is exhausting. And everyone is pretending all the time. Your teacher is pretending they know the right answer. The boss is pretending they know the right thing. And if COVID has taught us anything, I hope it would be that I can't imagine that anyone would sit down last year in a COVID planning meeting and think they know the right answer. So that's sort of like, I don't know, how might we? And then you get different vantage points and what are the trade-offs? And all of a sudden you come up with a provisional plan that certainly isn't perfect. Maybe it'll last 3 weeks, but you did it together, and then real life happened, and then you do it all over again, which sounds a lot like democracy at its best anyway. So I'm hopeful. Those are the hopeful bits, that, Christy, that I hear. Yes.
It sounds like then for a team to be effective with a constellation model, there has to be a vulnerability in the mindset, right? That willingness. And I'm wondering if there are other mindset prerequisites that are necessary among that team for it to succeed, especially as they're shifting from a more of a triangle paradigm to a constellation.
Totally. I think the vulnerability and all of Brene Brown's great work and Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School, I think she coined psychological safety. And famously, Google did that, like Project Aristotle, and they spent lots of money and time. And what makes our good teams good? And is it the most diverse team? No. Is it the most or least diverse team? No. Is it the smartest leader? No. Is it the smartest combined, IQ of the group? None of these things. It was groups that could provide psychological safety with one another, which is another way of saying space to be able to be your imperfect self with other people and say, I don't know, or I'm scared, or I'm hopeful, and all those normal scary things that we do around tables. So that's a big one. But I think one of the things I've gotten the most sort of pushback, but helpful pushback, is I pick a fight with Teddy Roosevelt right at the end of the book. There's this famous speech that I'm not going to give. Maybe you guys have memorized it. My uncle, when I was 11 years old, my parents got divorced, and he took me on a long road trip to sort of get my mind off the divorce. And I was sitting in the back seat, and he made me memorize it's not the critic who counts, it's the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with dust and sweat and blood. It goes on, and who, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place or her place will never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. So I was 11. I learned it. He was very appreciative. He bonded. Then I get married to my amazing wife, Brooke, here in Kentucky, and we're at the rehearsal dinner in downtown Louisville, and he makes me stand up and recite it. And it's one of those things, I don't know if you memorize things when they're little, those and song lyrics from the 1980s. I mean, they're in here forever. I have forgotten lots of other things, but I can't unforget them. And so I stood up with my soon-to-be wife and my wonderful mother-in-law and my father-in-law, all these amazing people, my mom and dad. And then I reflected on it. And so the fight I picked, which is a really good speech and people love it. And I think it is really unhelpful, and especially really unhelpful for where we are now as a country. Because let's be honest, it is a gladiatorial framework. That's why it's the man or woman who's in the arena. So your choice is, as Teddy Roosevelt sets it out, or you're there in the arena fighting it out, win or lose, or you are being a bystander sitting on the sidelines and basically, in the movie Gladiator, that kind of thing. So I get it. By the way, lots of people love this. President Obama read it at his eulogy for John McCain. And he read it for John McCain because he was a graduate of the Naval Academy, and every graduate of the Naval Academy has to memorize this thing. Brene Brown modeled all of her books on this famous quotation. Nelson Mandela and LeBron James has it etched into his sneakers. So that's like a pretty tough crew to take. And I get why it's inspiring, but to me, what it misses is it forces us into fight it out in the arena or sit it out. So fight it out or sit it out. And I was like, okay, so if you had to pick, sitting it out's kind of lame, so fight it out. Why are those the only two choices? And what I would say, there is a third choice, or third, fourth, fifth, sixth choice, but let's just be simple. The third choice is, how about work it out, play it through, make something with other people. You don't have to sit there and do nothing or be fighting. But we have so internalized this sort of win-lose, fight-it-out mentality. And here's the question, we won't do it here, but in the process of writing this book, when I moved back to Louisville over 4 years ago, anytime people were gathered, like 10 people, you'd say, okay, what's the opposite of winning? It says losing. And you say, okay, I agree. More interesting, what's the opposite of winning and losing? And then something really interesting happens, which is 9 out of 10 of us say, I don't know, not playing, right? I don't know, sitting it out. And then 1 in 10, and it's always a different answer, but 1 in 10 says playing, or laughing, or living, or being, or all the other things that we value in our lives that you cannot win or lose. Right? Like, you cannot, despite what your mama said, you cannot win parenting. You cannot win your career. And you cannot win a marriage. Although if you try, you could lose one. So all these things, careers, parenting, and just, there are many more. You cannot win or lose. And yet, 9 out of 10 of us say, if we're not winning and losing, we're doing nothing. That's how much the pyramid perspective is in us. It's not out there at a big company or out there at a school. It's in here. And that's, I think, the first step to being like, oh, okay. We've gotten so good at knowing who's up and who's down, so good at focus, 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 and so good at chopping things up into their component parts, which is what you do with a pyramid, that we've lost sight of other kinds of order, other kinds of meaning. And that's what I'm hoping this book can start to bring to light. We call on.
Matthew, I have a question. So this summer you shared in our senior leadership team your work that you did as VP ambassador with the schools around the UK in your business, and what you sort of saw in terms of vulnerability and students' perception of where they fell in the hierarchy, and how sort of their outcomes in their minds were already predicted. So would you share some
Sure.
of that?
Yeah. So when I got to the UK, the Pew Research people put out this global report. And it was 40 countries. It was sort of most of what we used to call Western Europe, plus Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Brazil, South Africa, Nigeria, a whole bunch of big, interesting and small, interesting countries. And they asked young people, 25 and under, do you like love America, kind of neutral, or thumbs down? Right? And in all countries but one, young people had a more favorable opinion of America than their parents or grandparents. And the one country that young people had a less favorable opinion of the United States was the United Kingdom. So I thought, okay, there's an opportunity. And what should we do? And so we brainstormed the team, and I was like, one thing I know young people don't want is a lecture from an American ambassador. So we're not doing that. So I didn't. So we would do, basically, Brooke is a trained art therapist. And so we did art therapy. 100 kids at a time. It was just like this. We get like 100 kids, and we give them a blank index card. This one. I always travel around with one. Blank card and an embassy pencil, and say, please draw me a picture of something that frustrates you about America. And it was always a boy, if it wasn't an all-girls school. Always a boy who just gave me, in an instant, this panic look like, I can't draw. And then I would say, that's okay. I didn't even have to say it. I'd be like, and if you'd rather write a word, you can write a word. So we got a mixture of words and doodles. And then we'd go around and they'd say them out, and so they'd say whatever they said, I'd repeat it, and then we'd write it on the big whiteboard, and we would talk about it for 55 minutes, talk about all the frustrations. And then we'd say 5 minutes at the end and say, flip over the card, one word or one picture of what inspires you or gives you hope about it. So I have 20,000 index cards over on Cherokee Road. 10,000 of those index cards have the identical doodle, which is a gun. It's a little handgun. So then I made it into a word cloud every time I went to a school. So I have, 200 schools, 20,000 index cards, and I would update the word cloud, so the most popular. So guns was like half the huge guns, followed by racism and police brutality. That's 2013, 14, 15, 16. That's what these young people thought about America. And so I had lots of learnings from that. A big one was that what we think of as domestic policy, as an ambassador, we were trained to talk about United States, Middle East peace, Israel, Palestine, climate change, our use of drones, Edward Snowden and intelligence gathering. I mean, that was kind of, we weren't trying to talk about guns, racism, police brutality. Well, we can make that distinction in our minds, but for young people in the UK, domestic policy is foreign policy. And so we have to talk about that. So then I came back here and I loved it. I mean, I learned, and thank you for participating tonight. That's what I said to Mr. Gahan. I was like, I miss hearing from, people your age and what you're thinking. And so I tried to keep it going here, not at the scale that I did in the UK, but I went to Southern Indiana, a bunch here in Louisville, and same exercise, except I didn't ask American students what do they think about the United Kingdom, because I don't think they think about the United Kingdom a lot. Lucy has a wonderful exception. So I just said, what do you think, what frustrates you about your own country? So same format, very different answers. But the number one frustration was division, racial, economic, political, followed closely by loneliness. So division and loneliness. And then when we flipped it over, what are the positive parts? It was diversity and freedom. So I was like, okay, so let's just take the two, division and diversity, the same root, div. So at the core of what they feared most and loved most was separateness. And this is while I was writing the book, and I was like, oh, okay. So they want to be themselves, and they want their friends and colleagues and fellow citizens to be their distinct individual selves. And they want diversity without division, and they want unity without uniformity. And I was like, well, okay. And that led me to discover on the back of a dollar bill this symbol of the constellation, which lets you stand out and fit into something bigger. And I think does achieve, in theory anyway, the ability to have diversity without division and unity without demanding uniformity and that everyone be distinct. Does that get at the, yeah, so.
Matthew, what were the positive words from the UK?
On the positive side of the British cards, there wasn't a big one like guns on the positive side. There were like 5 tied for first place. Diversity, opportunity, freedom, food. Those first 3 didn't surprise me. Food surprised me.
Well, England.
Maybe it shouldn't. And then it was like sports and movies and films and stuff that you might expect. But there was this wonderful man who was like a mentor to Brooke and me when we went through charm school before we went to Sweden. He was a retired foreign service, which is it's not charming at all. And he said, hey, you know what you'll discover? He was a retired foreign service officer who was in the public diplomacy, which used to be its own thing, separate from the State Department, back when he started. He said, you will discover that people love America and don't much like the United States. That's interesting. Like, tell me more. He said, well, I mean, America is like food and movies and sports and all that kind of sort of happy stuff. And the United States is like foreign policy and he said, so here's the challenge. And I was like, oh, thanks for the tip. And he said, no, here's your challenge. Don't just spend your time on the happy American stuff. He's like, deal with their discomfort with the United States, especially with a president like Barack Obama, who young people are generally open to and interested in, because it's his drone policy too. And so deal with, that discomfort and that disconnect and that disagreement. And I thought that was wonderful. So that's what I tried to do at those sessions, was to try to make, and I wasn't trying to, maybe this is a good way to end it because I think we're out of time. But I was invited back to Charm School to talk to people about to go off and be both ambassadors and then first-time career foreign service officers sent all around the world. And so I did this little gimmick where I said, okay, quick show of hands, how many people here like to lose an argument? And no one ever raises their hand, unless you're with a bunch of high school seniors and there's some contrarian in the back who just does it for fun. But so no one likes to lose an argument. So why do we spend so much time and effort teaching people how to win? And I know in our legal system, like winning arguments is a thing and it's part of our adversarial system. I get all that. And we spend so much time and energy convincing people how to be good at winning arguments, and none of us ever likes to lose them. So I don't think we should be in the argument winning business. And maybe as a way to end it, if we want to heal our democracy, I don't think, and there is absolutely a time and place for fighting it out in the arena on many important issues that I care a lot about, and I have fought and will fight again in that context. In addition to fighting it out, working it out and working it through and trying to help heal, because I don't think you can fight, heal. I don't think that pattern and tone leads to healing alone. There needs to be another set of patterns, and that's what I'm hoping this book can encourage us all to try to do. And thank you so much.
Thank you.